Deathlok the Demolisher was a Marvel Comics character co-created by the artist Rich Buckler and the writer Doug Moench in 1974. The character would star in the bi-monthly comic book Astonishing Tales for the next 2 years before basically disappearing into obscurity. He would make very few appearances between 1976 and 1990, at which point the character was completely rebooted, and then rebooted again, and again. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to mainly focus on the original Deathlok, Luther Manning, and his overly complicated history. The character started out being originally called Deathlok by the artist Rich Buckler, who came up with the concept and the design. Rich then got the help of writer Doug Moench to help him flesh out the character details and to write the actual scripts to his penciled pages. Along the way, Moench changed the name of the character to Deathlok because, well, it sounded better than Deadlock. With the series outline in place, Buckler approached editor Roy Thomas to see if Marvel would be interested in a comic based on this character. At the time, Marvel was in negotiations to acquire the comic book rights to the popular TV show, The $6 Million Man, so they weren't initially interested in having two cyborg-based characters in their lineup. When another company acquired the rights to that property, Buckler and Moench were given the green light to basically do whatever they wanted in the pages of Astonishing Tales. Conceptually, the character of Deathlok was very interesting. Luther Manning, the alter ego of Deathlok, was a soldier that died during a training exercise. It sort of suggested this wasn't accidental, but it's never really made clear. What was left of his body was frozen, and then part of his head, nervous system, and brain were transplanted into a nearly indestructible cybernetic body. Manning's consciousness was enhanced by circuitry and by a computer that would give him instructions, calculate threats, and it would also analyze data when necessary. Manning's tactical skill in battle, which we're constantly told about but we never actually see, was to be utilized by the onboard computer during missions, and Manning's consciousness would be subservient to the computer. Obviously, Manning took control of the cyborg body and made the computer system subservient to his needs. From that point forward, all Manning wanted was to become human again, and basically all of the stories in Astonishing Tales were based around this purpose. Yeah, if you're listening to this and thinking, hey, isn't that RoboCop? You're not alone there. So I'm going to acknowledge the similarities and just move on. Feel free to beat that dead horse at your leisure. The setting for the series was the distant future of 1990, which was 7 years after all the superheroes on Earth suddenly disappeared. Primarily, the story stays in and around the destroyed ruins of New York, a city that was devastated by terrorist bombings in 1985. All that's left in the ruins are random people necessary for the plot, and cannibals. But it's here that our protagonist walks around looking for a cure to his inhumanity. What makes Deathlok interesting is he embodies the fear of future technology and how it will be used in the coming years. There's also the implication that computers have an inherent consciousness that will always try to subvert or control basic human perception and emotion. Even though we know that fundamentally isn't true, it's an idea that feels true. There's also the uselessness of Deathlok's struggle to regain his humanity. Basically, he's an animated corpse that will eventually rot to nothing inside a mechanical shell. And there's literally no way he can achieve his goal, since there's nothing left of his body. His journey, his struggle, can only end in failure. Yet he persists, with a single-minded purpose to reclaim everything he's lost. And finally, Deathlok is the direct inverse to Captain America. Both are super soldiers, created with the intent to win a war. The experiment that led to the creation of Captain America was a success, and he became a symbol of patriotism and freedom. The experiment that created Deathlok was a grotesque misinterpretation of the ultimate soldier, and he openly fought against the ideals he was programmed to uphold. Also, Captain America is the pinnacle of human capability, while Deathlok is the tragedy of human reliance on technology to enhance our capabilities. As I said, the setting and the concepts around the character of Deathlok are all rather interesting. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about the story as it plays out in Astonishing Tales. The 11 issues worth of stories in Astonishing Tales were, well, the polite way to describe them is to call them uneven. The less polite way is to say that they are a convoluted, disjointed, overly melodramatic mess with subplots that just go nowhere. Which isn't to suggest it's complete nonsense, but it does lack a certain coherency. The stories, such as they are, really are a showcase for the artist to experiment with a more cinematic style, which works, but at the same time, it's sort of at the expense of the narrative. Or to put it another way, the artist wanted to draw cool shit and innovative sequences, and whether these things made story sense were kind of secondary. I mean, my younger self loved the surface level nihilism in these stories, and I totally identified with Luther Manning's struggle to maintain his humanity in a world that was slowly becoming dependent on technology. But my noticeably older self had a real tough time getting through this material when I reread it for the purposes of this review. Themes and concepts are thrown out haphazardly and never get fully formed. There's a lot of potential, but it all takes a backseat to the ass-kicking, tough-talking action, which does not age well. However, this unused potential would be fully realized much later in a story arc by Jim DeMatteis and Mike Zeck in 1983. Prior to that, though, Deathlok would pop up and make some mostly forgettable appearances in Marvel Team-Up number 46, Marvel Spotlight number 33, and in Marvel 2-in-1 number 27. He would also have 2 cameo appearances in that same title, which would later establish him as a plot point in the Project Pegasus storyline in Marvel 2-in-1 number 54. But the Deathlok in that story was a fully computerized cyborg, with all of Luther Manning's humanity removed. For all intents and purposes, that story killed off the Deathlok character. He just didn't have a place within the Marvel Universe at that time. That appearance really feels like house cleaning. Like its only intent was to remove a character that had outlived its usefulness. However, that didn't feel like a fitting end, and it would be Jim DeMatteis who would take all the dangling plots from the end of the Astonishing Tales run, recontextualize the Deathlok character within the Marvel Universe, and give that character a more heroic finale. And this would all be accomplished in a 3-issue arc in Captain America. In that story, the clone of Luther Manning comes back in time from the distant future of 1990 to destroy the corporation that initially created the technology that went into the construction of Deathlok. One Deus Ex Machina later, and Captain America becomes involved to help Luther in this quest. What these 3 issues do is tie up a lot of continuity issues, and, more importantly, it gives the character a sense of closure. It also establishes that the distant future of 1990 is now an alternative timeline that has been avoided within regular Marvel continuity. It was a simple, elegant solution that served to satisfy continuity junkies, and it also gave the Deathlok character a place to exist, even though that place wasn't a part of the mainstream universe. This is what makes the story work. It's coherent, and it acknowledges the convoluted history of this flawed character. Then it finds a place for Deathlok to exist within that framework, while resolving the character's ultimate goal. I mean, that's actually kind of impressive. Really, this should be where the Luther Manning saga ended, but he would show up once again during the final issues of the rebooted version of Deathlok from 1990. In a story reminiscent of the Terminator franchise, Luther is unstuck in time, and he's programmed by a bad guy named Timestream. Ugh, what a name. To undo the changes he and Captain America had previously established. The current Deathlok, Michael Collins, is called on to prevent this from happening. It's big and bombastic and loud, and in the end Luther Manning ends up taking his own life because, it's a grim and gritty sacrifice, right? I mean, this story is just big, muscled guys with even bigger guns, waving them around and unloading their ammo into each other's faces. Yeah, it's unintentionally homoerotic, and it fetishizes violence like only early 90s comics could. As far as I can tell, that was the end of the original Deathlok, Luther Manning. The character of Deathlok would be rebooted once more in 1999, and when that went nowhere, it was rebooted again in 2010 with a 7-issue series that comes off as a high-concept movie pitch. After that, in 2014, the character was rebooted one more time with a concept that was undoubtedly used to bring it in line with the character's appearance in the TV show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Technology is such an integral part of our lives that we no longer have a fear of the future. It happened while we were busy distracting ourselves. This might be why the original idea of Deathlok is such a hard sell to a modern audience. The paranoia inherent in the concept seems quaint or misguided. We tend to see the benevolence of technology and what it will do for us, rather than seeing the dark side to the cheap conveniences we rely upon. Which isn't to suggest the Deathlok concept can't work in modern times, but I think it might have to represent some marginal, fringe type of technology that has ramifications we can barely comprehend. Something with a Cronenberg body horror type of theme, perhaps. I can see it now. A cybernetic person that's composed of discarded Fitbits. jailbroken iPhones, and tricked out Nintendo Switches, with a fidget spinner as its power source. Yeah, cut me a check, Marvel. That one ain't free. Until next time.